Thank you for joining me. I'm Madeline Blair. This is Unlocked. Unlocked is a show all about opening possibilities so that when you're hit with the unexpected, you've got options from which to choose. Today we're going to be talking with Kelly Cressip. He's an expert on creating conversations that sing. And I can tell you from experience, I've watched him do this. In the midst of a conversation, he just shifted it with such subtlety, and then it sang. So we're going to have lots of strategies. So I want you to stay tuned. Okay, I promised you Kelly Cressip. Well, Dr. Kelly Cressip is an author. He's an editor. He's a storyteller. He's a workshop leader, a presentation coach, a former commentator on NPR. And during the 1980s, he worked in Seattle as a freelance visual artist and film and theater critic, and in Tokyo as a technical editor, journalist, and English as a second language instructor. His books include an interpretive biography of pop artist Andy Warhol, and it's called Pop Trickster and Fool. And his second book called A Love-Hate Guide to Breaking Bad. In 2005, Kelly coordinated the first Smithsonian Conference on Storytelling for Transformation. He has presented workshops on storytelling and archetypes, as well as humor, public speaking, mentoring at such places as the Pentagon, NASA Goddard, the Smithsonian, and as a guest faculty at the National Speakers Association University. As a performance artist, he has been featured at the Ontological Theater and Dixon Place in Greenwich Village, the New Genre Festival in Tulsa, the Washington Storytellers Theater in D.C., and more. He's currently a faculty at the University of Maryland. Oh my goodness, I am so excited. Kelly Cressip, welcome to Unlocked.
Thank you, Madeline. It's good to see you this morning.
Thank you. Well, Kelly, I'm so excited about this conversation because it's about conversation.
I know, me too. It's just thrilling.
You know, you have done so many things. Why don't you talk a little bit about how you got into conversation? What made you interested in this topic, and how did you develop the skill?
Well, thanks for the invitation. I would say part of it came from college. The experience of what I did best was math, and what I was passionate about was English. And I had to make my route out of being a math major possibility to thinking really English and stories were engaging me more, were making me think during non-class hours. I was diving into books and finding passion there. And then some of the conversations that I was having back in college, including one that happened after I saw the movie Apocalypse Now. I went to a friend's dorm and we had a conversation that lasted 3 hours. It is still the single best conversation I've ever had in my life. It
Mm.
was like we were finishing each other's sentences. I still get a kind of goosebump feeling when I think about that. Uh, One happened more recently. I was on a bus from New York City to DC, which is sometimes, well, okay, I'll just read, I'll do my laptop work. And I happened to be sitting next to somebody, turned out to be Ecuadorian American man who repaired helicopters, and we got on to the topic of Breaking Bad, and suddenly we had a conversation again that lasted about 3 hours. It seemed to die whenever we steered in another direction. So we came back to it. This is while I was deciding to write this book. So that's a very rich conversation with a former stranger that turned out to be a really galvanizing and it's like a milestone in my own life that I had that conversation that I still remember it a decade later.
I'm really struck by the fact that it not only galvanized you, but it galvanized you to something specific, like writing a book.
It did, and the book was so much rich in terms of conversations I was having with other people at the time. That TV series really unlocked a lot of people in terms of having feelings about a TV show, having thoughts about a TV show that they had not had
Mm.
before, and that linked up with what I was feeling as well. So this was a chance to really have a conversation with others and with myself as I was trying to parse that out.
Mm. Well, you've described two incredible conversations. What does it mean, though, to create a conversation that's vital and dynamic?
Well, I would say a combination of listening and sharing skills. If someone's doing 100% of the listening, it's harder to say that that's an actual conversation, whether it's two people in the room or whether it's more. And I've noticed there were times that I felt when the conversation became a default mode, for instance, talking about food can be very enriching and exciting, but sometimes it becomes like a stranglehold, and I feel like, hold it, there's something that's missing here, and it has to do with what about the people who don't want to talk about food
Mm.
or have something to share that they're just waiting to talk about, but it's not happening because everyone's default to not always food, but sometimes other things that just become kind of a, "Oh, I guess this is okay," but it could go further. So some of that has to do with planning in advance and thinking, "Okay, I'm gonna have a dinner with this person. What can I find out about them that is the question that will unlock something in them that maybe they didn't see coming?" Uh, a person going to college, you can think of cliche questions to ask. What's your major? When do you plan to graduate? But if you do a little bit of thinking, what's the question that might get them to think about something else? What's something that you're absolutely passionate about? What's something that really incited feelings for you recently? Sometimes you can do back channel work and find out by talking to somebody they know. It's like, what's the question they're waiting to be asked?
That's really exciting because so often when we meet someone who is in school, I don't care what grade they're in, you're always asking, well, what are you studying? And your question about, or your point about what's really exciting you right now? What are you really looking forward to? That's a very different question. And you're right. It goes into a different thought process.
And it puts you on a level playing field because everyone has passions. But if I ask, what's your major? It becomes immediately about the dynamic between an adult and a student or a
Right.
teacher, which they will find out that I am. And yet, this is something that I do find out as a teacher when I'm having student conferences. My official business is to find out what topic they're going to pursue this semester. My unofficial agenda is to plant a bug in them, to get some kind of passion out of them, to make them feel blessed and excited about that. So sometimes when things are stuck in student conferences, I will say, you strike me as the kind of person who, and then it'll be some blessing, who makes things happen in the world. So I want to see your eyes light up about something that you can make happen in the world, and it's of your own choosing. And then
Mhm.
sometimes that happens, or sometimes we need to go in a different way. Tell me something that you did recently that you're proud of.
Yeah.
Tell me a big hobby that you have wanted to pursue or a project that's been on your back burner for a while. Tell me what would happen if you actually pursued that. So often that's the way through.
Ah, love it. All right. You you've actually answered my next question, which was how do you help make a conversation lively and dynamic. But I think here's a different dimension on that. Let's say you're working with a student or someone who is younger than you, who may be looking up to you. Well, how do you help them shine in the conversation?
Partly is to really drop all my credentials. They already know my credentials from day one in the classroom and just relate to them, make sure that I'm on the level. I'm seated and essentially in a conference room with them, seated face to face and getting eye contact. And so leveling the field. And then I guess making sure that they know that their passions are I'm curious about them, getting
Mm.
interested. From day one, I've asked them what their favorite song is, and sometimes that starts a new conversation.
Mhm.
Uh, I have found that asking them what their favorite book is isn't always a starter because some of them are embarrassed. Some of
Yeah,
them truly are embarrassed of
yeah.
having not read something for uh, for pleasure in so we don't necessarily have to go that route.
You
But what
I
they're
have to I have to tell you, Kelly, a funny story. I was once working with a group of writers, and I made the mistake of asking them what their favorite book was. Well, they knew exactly what their favorite book was, only I didn't recognize half of them because I'm
that
not I'm not an English major.
that's right. Well, sometimes also you get plot summary and all the things that don't necessarily connect. You're getting book report essentially, and that's not what you were really hoping for.
That's right.
So maybe it's about a place that they visited recently. If I
Mhm,
find out they're from overseas, a
mhm.
question that can sometimes spark a new conversation. Do you miss anything about your home country? And
Yeah,
then they'll tell me about a restaurant on a specific corner,
yeah.
uh, or a sound that they heard every day
Mhm.
when they woke up. And it's like, oh, I miss that so much. And so that's something that can bring out something
Yeah.
so that
Oh,
they know that they're being valued for whatever it is that may be different between us, whatever we might share in common. And so, well, also making it not just about the specific topic at hand. Uh, the project that they'll need to pursue. It'll be maybe they're wearing a T-shirt that day, and I'll say, "Tell me about this T-shirt." We had a project that emerged after both of us got stuck in terms of thinking of a project idea, and the person was wearing a T-shirt about a summer leadership institute, and it turned out that they um, went back to that now as a camp counselor instead of a participant, and that was their project. So that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't gotten curious about what they were wearing.
mm, interesting. Well, oftentimes I've read where you have to empathize with the person. Uh, well, that sometimes that's real easy for me because I connect with them very quickly. But I'd love your thoughts on how is it that you really can be empathetic to a person in the conversation.
Well, it's a good question. I happen to be a highly sensitive person. It was helpful for me to read the book about how it's so easy to get overwhelmed because I'm sometimes hearing feelings in the room that show up and I'm not sure how they can overwhelm me. So
Mm,
partly my problem is the opposite of feeling too much and finding okay, I need to just bracket that a little bit. I have that as a natural gift. So how do I empathize? It's a bit of a trick for me to figure out how to answer that. I think partly it's to know. sometimes people will talk from the head, and I want to shift the conversation and make it safe for them to talk from the heart
Mhm.
or from the gut. And so it's a bodily thing. And I sometimes will intervene, will say, what is the feeling that comes up while you're talking about this?
Yeah.
How how does that impact your life? If that was a place in your body that you feel that feeling,
Mhm.
where is that place? And so it's a more grounded thing, so that the person doesn't get lost simply talking about ideas or abstractions.
Mhm. I really appreciate your shift from speaking from the heart to speaking from the gut. Because, some people really, especially in business, speak from my heart, please, but speak from my gut, which is basically the same place. But socially, it's more acceptable to say, okay, this is my gut reaction.
Yeah.
I like that little subtle shift. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. So the term intestinal fortitude is one that
Yes.
you can use if somebody is not like gut. We don't use that term here, but intestinal fortitude is like, and there's the exercises you can do to find, okay, where am I unbudgeable? What exercise might I do to feel like I'm really in my gut? And I've really enjoyed that as a sort of an embodied practice of how do I reach what I'm feeling in my gut, and how do I access that?
Okay, Kelly, wait, you have to tell us at least one exercise for us to do
I
that.
wrote down about four or five. So one of them is to do and don't laugh here, a football backstop exercise. So pressing yourself, if you're alone in the room, pressing yourself again with your hands up against a wall, pressing yourself into the wall until you feel your body center shift from your head down to your heart and all the way to your gut, and to feel it as a robust presence, and kind of maybe it'll have a sound connected to it. Ugh, right?
Hmm.
So you can do that also with another person as just a kind of a warrior stance to press against their shoulders and they're pressing against your shoulders, not to throw you off balance. It's not a competition, it's really an exercise to bring you fully into your gut, to feel like that's where I need to be.
This is fascinating, Kelly, because that was one of the exercises I was taught for speaking, that you go around the room and you press the wall. And
Interesting.
it never occurred to me that it wasn't that I was pressing the wall to get my presence to around the room, but to get me grounded.
Yeah,
Excellent. Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah. And sometimes that's a way of priming, oh, this is that's what I thought about this. This is what I really feel when I get down to into the depths of my own being and access that.
Mm.
And this is what I need to do, perhaps in a conversation or in my life. But that's a really good technique I have found.
Can you give us one more?
Uh, you may know about the New Zealand tradition of the Haka, so uh, uh, the really embodied, fiercely warrior stance of uh, and and this can be used as a form of intimidation. You can see Haka videos on YouTube, but you
Yes.
can also uh, find that just as a solo uh, movement and dance exercise, just to find, okay, where is my center of gravity? What is my source of dynamism? That's one extra way. I want to say dance and movement just in general. I
Mhm.
will be stuck at my writing desk thinking, I don't know if it's this word or that word, and I'm thinking too much about it as usual. What I need to do is say, okay, I could sit at my computer for 3 more minutes and they would be wasted time. What I'll do instead is get up and embody this dilemma or this feeling,
Ah,
whatever stuck place, and give embodiment to the very stuckness of it, and to find my way through movement. It looks a little strange, but then nobody's watching me, right?
nobody's watching. Right.
So I get up into the living room and I move around, and it doesn't have to look like anything that is an official dance or something done for someone else. It's literally just to access that part of myself where the core feeling gets and kind of outwit my mind to
Mm.
get around whatever my brain is doing. And I sometimes really it's something I have to do as a practice to just do it like a Hail Mary pass around my brain.
Oh, I love it. Well, my next question really has to do with something like this. You mentioned that you're stuck getting a word, but sometimes a conversation gets stuck. You mentioned food earlier, that, oh, this seems to be what we're talking about, so we'll talk about food, but maybe only 3 people of the 8 that are sitting around the table are really interested in food. How do you break out of that? What's a way in which you can gently, without offending people, just help them move to another place?
One thing is a vigilance about a point of entry that might take things in a different direction. Sometimes conversations get stuck because only one person is talking. So what about thinking of the theme that the person is talking about and inviting everyone else in the room to check in about that theme? Has this ever happened to you?
Yes, it
Uh,
has, Kelly.
yes.
You know it has.
Yes.
Very
So
recently.
I'm remembering an example of the
Yeah,
theme being, did you ever need to move toward a job because you had to get unstuck in your life?
yeah,
Was the job itself a way of I was in a prison of my own making or someone else's making and I needed to get out of it
yeah.
and hearing and giving people only a sentence, maybe 2 sentences, and be vigilant enough to sort of help to bless them into silence if they need that.
Yeah.
So, but giving the whole room a chance to weigh in about a topic.
Oh, that was
Also,
so powerful when you did that. The whole
and,
conversation went, and
and I got to hear things about people. Oh, I was living in this country and I had to, and this new job took me to this. It was so much of their life history came out of that
yeah,
next few minutes. That really meant a lot to me. I think also I mean, I have a tendency to say things that are slightly provocative at times if I feel that will be catalyzing.
mhm,
Recently, I happened to read the memoir of Pamela Anderson. That's not something that anyone would expect of me, right? So that's a surprise. The surprise also was I found out that her father, despite being a con man, was also Mensa material,
wow,
and she herself has read uh, Joseph Campbell, Colette. Uh, Reading is one of her big passions, and the intellectual content of that reading was at cross purposes for me with her image, her public image, and of somebody who spent a lot of time on yachts and at the Playboy Mansion. So that was a little bit
mm,
unexpected, and I didn't know whether people would come after me for having read this book or whatever, but it was like it was adding something surprising into
yeah,
the
yeah,
flow of the conversation.
yeah. By the way, I think you should define Mensa for our audience, just in case
Oh,
they've never heard the term.
thank you. Yes, the organization for people of high IQ.
Hmm. Great, thank you. Well, I want to take our conversation into a different direction. I think I'm going to do exactly what you said. Do something a little controversial. How do you handle a bully?
Okay, so this is a really important thing, and we see so much bullying happen these days, and it breaks my heart to see it at so many levels. So I appreciate the chance to dive deep into this. One moment that I remember was sitting down to a dinner party where there were 3 people at the table, and I was one of them. And the person I was across from, uh, it looked like belly aching was going to take up the entirety of the conversation. He was speaking very fast about something that happened 15 years ago, and it didn't relate to anything that was happening in the room or among the 3 of us, although it was about somebody that I knew. And I sat there thinking, oh, with some increasing sense of dismay about where that conversation was going. So, reading the room, reading my own feelings, What I chose to do was to intervene.
Mm.
The form that took, and again, I think there are humane and inhumane ways of intervening. I simply spoke the man's name, not shouting. I spoke the man's name. He was wound up enough, he kept talking, and I said his name again. He stopped talking for a moment, and I said to him, I want to connect with you, and I'm not connecting with you.
Mm.
What he said after that was, oh, I talk too much, I'll just shut up. And I said, I do want to connect with you. I'm not asking you to shut up. So we ended up, that was a moment, that was a real live moment for me. I hadn't confronted him in that way prior to that. The beautiful thing that happened was we did end up having a three-way conversation, more or less about what happens when an intervention like that takes place, and then it opens up different ways. And I had to remember that there was a moment of vulnerability when he said, I talk too much. There was something about that that was vulnerable.
Mhm.
And he was going into maybe what a shame spiral in a little way. And I realized I felt free enough in that conversational space to say, well, guess what? I think too much. And there was just this moment of we were the two guys, the other person was a woman. It was the two guys having said, this is something that is a problem for me. And I
And
felt something inside myself just really ease up and feel so present and no longer defended and like I've got to do battle to find some way into this conversation. Before when I the upshot of that conversation was he sent me a book title essentially answering the question that I asked about what happens when somebody thinks too much and what can they do to kind of break out of that.
mm,
Now, I could have taken the book title as a condescending answer on his part. I chose not to. I said, no, I mean, it brought up tears almost. It was just so moving to have found this new kind of common cause with this
mm,
person.
yeah. You know, what I really appreciate about this particular strategy is that it's a strategy that a woman can use even against a very strong male bully. You can simply say their name and keep saying their name until they acknowledge that you exist simply by responding. That's something that I think I know I would be comfortable doing, even when I'm in a very difficult situation with someone who is bound and determined that they are going to dominate the relationship. This is very helpful to me because I like to have strategies that do not, as you suggest, you don't become a combative situation. It becomes it becomes this kind of
Yeah.
situation. Thank you for that strategy. Very powerful.
Yes. I appreciate that. Sometimes you also have to really blank out on or let just flow to the floor the words that are coming at you.
Mm.
And this has to do with knowing your trigger points. I have a friend who is sharp as anything. He's just one of the most brilliant people I know, but he will talk you under the table, and some of what he's saying is just not very edifying to me. And what I've had to learn is notice where my trigger points are
Mm.
and notice, oh, I'm getting triggered, but not to blow up and to just let those words fall out onto the floor and just actively love this person and sit there not engaging with the words, not going into a kind of, well, my critique of that is, or how dare you say that, or taking umbrage and all that is just to sit there and love the man until he's finished talking. My mistake years ago with a friend of mine was to ask his wife, what do you do when he gets this way? That was the wrong thing to do. More recently, in a similar setup with the same people, I simply loved the man in silence. And I just thought, I'm not going to let what you're saying stop me from loving you. and maybe love is too strong a word, but deep affection and whatever.
Well,
And
one of the things one of the words that came to my mind as you said that was, I'm going to respect you for who you are. Battered, weak, vulnerable, um, hurt, and I'll just simply respect that. That's how I
yeah,
viewed that
that's
word.
right. That's right. To dive into whatever memories I have of what a beautiful person he is and just ride it out.
Hmm.
Well, what happened this time, his wife came through at the end and said, "Oh yeah, he gets this way sometimes." And it was like I didn't have to do it. Somebody should say it, but I didn't have to say it.
Yeah.
And then there was this moment of recognition of he gets this way sometimes. So okay, I get that way sometimes. So that makes it a human conversation instead of conversational hostage taking.
Mm.
So I was really, really proud of myself for the fortitude of having, I guess, the courage of staying silent, not forever, but just to sort of ride out and match the man energetically
Mm.
and just ride it out. So that's another strategy.
Fabulous. Two powerful strategies. Well, speaking of strategies, let's do a little bit of a little more of that. What if you're talking to someone and they turn away a compliment? I remember one time I was probably 21, 22, and someone was watching me work and they said, Madeline, you're amazing. And she gave me this wonderful compliment. And I sort of, "Mm-mm." And she turned to me and she said, and this woman who became a mentor for me. She said, Madeline, sometimes all you have to say is thank you. So what are some strategies you would use when somebody turns away the compliment?
Oh, one of them, I thank you so much. And that's one of the best ways of responding is just noticing when is it right to say thank you, and that's all.
Yeah.
Another idea that I use sometimes in my massage practice, I will compliment somebody physically and they will turn it back.
Mm.
And all I'll do, this is a little bit tricksterish, right? All I will do is I'll say, "Oh, let me try that again." And I'll repeat verbatim what I just said. And usually the person, I feel it in their body, they just slack a little bit. It's like I caught them out at refusing a compliment, but I didn't have to shame them about refusing a compliment.
Yeah.
And I tell you, I used to do that as a piano player back in high school, in college. And, oh, it was this false modesty when I got a compliment. So I remember what it's like to push back a compliment and persistence. So that's one strategy that I use. Sometimes I need to redescribe something because I didn't get it right the first time, but I am profuse in giving compliments to people, and I love to do it in a way. Sometimes with a counter at a grocery, a clerk at a grocery store, whatever it is. Maybe it's she's wearing uh, uh, earrings or a shirt that and maybe a necklace, or just finding a way in that brightens her day in a certain way. Usually, I find people don't give pushback to compliments like that, as long as I'm not doing it in a smarmy way or a way
Mhm.
that's gonna
Yeah.
leave them feeling creeped out or like it's the first entry point in some kind of, I don't know, make out or, like hitting on
Yeah.
the person.
Right.
So that's important.
Kelly, as you're saying that, one of the thoughts that comes to my mind, I tend to do that too because I'm very visual. So when I see somebody wearing a really beautiful coat, I'm likely, even if they're a perfect stranger and we're standing there waiting for the light to change so we can cross the street, I'll say, that is a gorgeous coat, but I'll try to be specific. Like, I like the color or that collar, the way it twists, so that becomes so specific they know you have seen them and you're not just throw. It's not a throw out or
It's
throw off.
not it's not a generic compliment.
Right.
It's also sometimes the opening to a story. Where did where did you find that fantastic necklace? And
Yes.
then it turns out it was in a different country and they
Yeah.
had to,
Yeah.
oh, there's something about it that they just love and they get to tell the story.
Hmm. Ah, fabulous. Fabulous. Well, my next question was, what might you do when you feel triggered? But I think you've covered that. Or if there's anything you want to add to that one.
It's probably I think of anger as one immediate trigger point, but you can be triggered into sadness.
Mm,
If somebody says something that is like they didn't know that that was a trigger point,
yeah.
or you're feeling you're missing out on something. I think also of if you hear somebody's totally happy, 100% elated travel story, and it might just feel like, wow, I do not want to hear this. Or what I do want to hear, not that I wish harm on this person, but I want to hear the story that's maybe the thing that went wrong.
Yeah.
And you might intervene and say, was there any of the how do I how do I express this? I don't want to set them up for failure, but I do want to invite them to say, well, I wonder, did anything go wrong on your trip that happened in a funny way?
Hmm.
Uh, and that can help to shift the conversation out of simple boasting.
Yeah.
So that's a roundabout answer to the question of trigger points. But sometimes my trigger point is I can't stand how uh, this is really triggering my fear of missing out, FOMO, right?
Mhm.
And sometimes it's like, oh, I need to just intervene to be able to say, oh, I wonder how I can contribute here. Maybe it's a reciprocal story that I can tell, or maybe it's just bringing awareness to the other person that they're really just kind of boasting about their trip
Mm,
instead of instead of really delving into it in a meaningful and and welcoming kind of way.
mm. Nice. Nice. Okay. Now, here's a tougher question, I think. What if you have a group that's just sort of, well, they've been meeting and they've been meeting for so long, they know each other and they just talk about the same things. Well, how do you energize that group through
It's a really
conversation?
it's a really good question and one that I don't always win. I've had some situations where I like the first time attending a potluck group that's been going on for a long time and I'm sussing out the situation. I don't want to come across as the alpha male conversation leader because I don't want to come across as arrogant. At the same time, when I'm maybe the second time or third time when I've paid my dues as it were, I can sometimes say, "Oh, what's the topic?" And I can think about this in advance. What's the topic that's waiting to happen here
Mm,
that might be a point of entry? And I need to find a few ways of my own topic, which is not boasting. Something about what I've done recently that would be not boasting, but would lead into something that everyone would relate to. Uh, and it might be a movie that I've seen recently that left me feeling a little mixed instead of just, oh, this is the best movie I've seen all year. You need to go see it. Because
mhm,
that's a form of kind of intimidation, right? I
yes.
also had to really watch this as a former movie and theater critic. Sometimes in my 20s, sometimes my conversations were, you just need to know what I felt about this in my considered professional opinion, and I wasn't as curious about other people's responses. So I had to rein that in and just like really be actively curious.
Mm,
So those things can happen in any number of ways. Uh, People get locked into certain topics, sometimes sports,
mhm,
sometimes food. And if you can look toward pivot points and you can think, oh, it comes up again. We're going to hear all these sports statistics that I have no relation to because I didn't see the game, and ask maybe what is it about that sport that is such a passion, and I can maybe find my way in by talking about Ted Lasso, the TV show, which I do care a lot about, or Friday Night Lights, which also happens to be about sports, but also is a point of entry. There are sometimes pivot points where you can get out of uh, the prison of a single topic and move in a different direction.
one of the things I really appreciate what you're saying is that these techniques I'll call them, that you're suggesting are not necessarily ones that just flash out in the blue. It's not a habitual. You have to, in a way, be prepared with thoughts, especially if you're working with a group that you've worked with them for a while, and you need to break them out of that. They need to enliven them. So this is a perfect example where you've got to be doing your homework, so to speak, if you really want to use conversation to help them. Yeah, thank you.
That's right. And sometimes it can be a conversation coming down the horizon. I'm thinking of Thanksgiving dinners and think about how much preparation goes into the food,
Yeah.
but take a little bit of time and energy ahead of time to think, what might I do to prepare for the conversation part of it?
Mm-hmm.
And to think out maybe a few topics in advance. Uh, one that people talk about is what are you grateful for, right? And there are others. Also, if you care enough about the people you're going to be seeing, think about maybe calling somebody up and saying, "What's the question that I need to ask your daughter? What is new for her that will make her sparkle?"
Nice.
Instead of the one that'll make her feel like, "Oh, that old question."
Yeah. Nice. Nice. I like that. Because oftentimes it is the younger crowd that gets excluded, or not excluded, but diminished in those kinds of family conversations.
Right.
Perfect. 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 All right. Now, I think you've touched on this a bit. What if the conversation becomes just so abstract? I mean, you can't get your fingers on anything, um, or it's too boastful, or it's too predictable. Maybe you've already talked about this. What are some things that you can do to just intervene? I think you've given us some, but are there more?
I need to say, I think of myself as a recovering academic. I have sat through so many conversations that felt abstract in a way that there was no way out because here you are in grad school and you're supposed to be having. So if people are using all abstract words, well, you sort of have to listen at some level. And yet it's like you can say things like, I'm getting a gut sense of just not connecting with this. Is there an example you can use? I sometimes feel this way in my conferences with students. I will not necessarily because of what they're saying, but because I've sat through a whole evening of conferences and I'm just feeling physically uh, run down. So I will say, are you open to us walking through the halls of this building while we discuss your topic? And sometimes just the movement itself will
Mm,
be the way that we needed to do it to get through it.
nice.
And it will make it less abstract somehow because the person has to be fully present in their body. And yet you're walking, you're not doing a marathon. So you can walk and have a conversation. Maybe that's a solution if you're getting locked into a conversation and think, oh, are you okay if we just take a walk here?
Yeah.
So that's one thought.
Well, you've given us so many strategies and examples. Uh, let's say you just want to keep one thing in your mind as you get ready to enter a conversation, or just in general. What's that one thing that you should keep in mind to have real conversations with someone?
Something that I do, and I informally, and I don't think I've even spoken about this before, but just in the back of my head, whether it's coming up to a grocery clerk or maybe a classroom of students, is what's the best thing that could happen in this exchange? What's the best thing? Uh,
Mm,
Now, I don't want to aim for the sky here because you might say, well, the best thing would be a first date. And that's not what I'm thinking.
yeah.
Right. No, no. So it's really like, no, within the parameters of this particular setting and uh, the nature of my interaction with this person, what's the best thing that could happen here? And
Mm,
and just thinking, okay, I'm going to put my effort into that. And if the best doesn't emerge, I tried. I think that's the message at the back of my head as
mhm.
I'm coming into a conversation. and I'm sort of on edge a little bit until something really good happens. And I have to wait a little while
Mm.
sometimes because it is important at Thanksgiving meals to let the host or the cook or the mini cooks be blessed for their food. And so talk a little about the food. What was it that you did with this recipe or this salad or whatever? So that's important. And it is a very much a holiday about food. But then if you notice, oh, we've all become food obsessives. What's what are we missing here?
Yeah,
So that's a different way of saying what's the best that could
that's the
happen. Is
best
like,
that can happen.
what's missing here?
Yeah, it's great. Kelly, I knew this would be a wonderful conversation.
Oh, I'm smiling. I'm just really enjoying this.
Oh, good. Well, what I love is that we've come out of it with, or I've come out of it with so many specific strategies. Like if you're encountering a bully in the conversation, just name them and keep naming them until they stop. And then you can express yourself. That's to me is gold. Um, and to be aware of your trigger points and when you're in them, so that those are the moments where you say, no, it's not their problem, it's my problem. Now let me just let go of that. I love that. And, and the other one was this FOMO, the fear of missing out. Do I really fear missing out? And what, you know, rather ask what's the best thing that can come out of this. I love it.
Right.
Well, thank you so much, Kelly. This has been a wonderful conversation, as I said, but I do want to give you a couple of moments to just say anything more that you want to convey to our audience.
Sure. The one thought that I had as you were speaking is the happy warrior is a good metaphor to carry forward. But when I'm repeating a person's name, I'm really doing it from a space of joy instead of calling down the other person or
Yeah.
trying to shame them into silence. So happy warrior can get me a lot. I want to say, and I've talked about this, uh, head, heart, and gut are the three ways that I can show up. So the head is going to tell me some kind of mental discernment. What intervention is possible and what form might it take? What is reasonable here? And it's not always a solution that I can come up with, but my mind is going to say, okay, here's a possibility, and I'm not sure. I need to assess the situation mentally before I go forward and just plow in. Part of that assessment is saying, what's the room doing? What do I feel? So that's connecting to the heart. So if I feel anger, frustration, sense of this is going nowhere and I feel empty, then at least do a reckoning of my own heart. What is happening with my heart? And then, as I was saying earlier, going further down into my gut and saying, what does my gut say I need to do? So, having done some intestinal fortitude work, whether it's the warrior stance or the Haka dance or just dance movement, there's some way that I'm embodied. And if I don't feel like my head, heart, and gut are all invited to this conversation, then what might I do to become more physically present and get other people more physically present into the conversation?
Wise words indeed, Kelly. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for your very, very engaging questions.
Well, I knew Kelly would be fantastic. And I bet at this point you're saying, yeah, yeah, you agree. This segment of the show is where I share with you some book that has had an important impact on my life and my work. It's not meant to be a report of the book, a review of the book, or a summary of the book, or a critique of the book. Rather, all I do is tell you why I found the book to be so important to me. This week's book is Conversation: How Talk Can Change Our Lives by Theodore Zeldin. It's a very small book. In fact, it is so small that I have managed to lose my copies somewhere in my library. It's probably tucked between a couple of books that are too big for it to stand out. But what I did do was I grabbed an image for you so that you can see what that book looks like. The message, however, even though the book is small, is very powerful. So powerful that I don't even need that book anymore to remember it. It's etched in my mind. He wrote words roughly like this: a conversation happens when you enter into it open to the possibility that you will change your mind. Wow. Can you imagine entering into a conversation with your mind so open to listening that you're willing and able to change your mind in the midst of the conversation? Here is what others have said about Zeldin. This is from The Independent on Sunday of London. Zeldin is one of the 40 world figures whose ideas are likely to have a lasting relevance to the new millennium. Another quote is from the magazine Littéraire from Paris. Zeldin is one of the 100 most important thinkers in the world. Quite amazing. Conversation: How Talk Can Change Our Lives by Theodore Zeldin. I want to thank you for joining me today. And I hope that you've enjoyed this conversation that I had with Kelly. If you would like to have a free 30-minute consultation with me, send me an email and we'll set one up. What did you learn today? If you learned something, especially if you're going to do something different as a result, would you post it on social media? Maybe write it as a comment on the YouTube channel underneath the video. And if you're on YouTube, please click the like button and subscribe. I'm Madeline Blair, wishing you infinite possibilities as you unlock your resilience.